Hello everyone, how's it going? I hope you guys are having a wonderful day today. This is OSK, and today we're going to go back to one of my favorite under-the-radar games. All of you channel veterans will recognize this game in the background, Spellbreak. Let me tell you a little something about Spellbreak. It has gone through a bit of a metamorphosis since the last time I covered it. It's currently in release 0.34 and has finally been released for its long-awaited closed beta. The class system has been completely overhauled and the gauntlet mechanics have changed slightly, but we're not here to give a patch review or tutorial this time. This is for the players ready to jump right in and grab some wins, and in preparation for this video, I casted a poll on my Twitter and Discord to gather data on class preferences for Spellbreak, and by analyzing the poll results, judging each class's strengths and weaknesses, I give you the class breakdown for the Spellbreak closed beta. Starting out with my former favorite class, we have Frostborn, Spellbreak's designated marksman class. Frostborn has dropped significantly in terms of popularity and power due to the heavy nerfing of Frozen Alacrity. In fact, Frozen Alacrity isn't even a skill anymore. The new primary skill for Frostborn allows the user to leave ice trails that let every single player gain a small movement buff when running on it. I repeat, now everyone, including your enemies, gets a speed boost from Alacrity. Not to mention that once broken, these ice trails leave frost mists which drastically slow all movement and cast speed of all actions, and eventually freezes those affected if they don't escape, so there's actually quite a heavy punishment if you get caught ice skating in the middle of a fight. In addition to this, the Frost Gauntlet itself has a very distinct sorcery that provides decent close-range defensive capabilities, but can easily be outmaneuvered in the same way normal Frost Mist can. While it does block certain projectiles, it does not protect from above, which, in a game where verticality is easily achieved, does not do well for the player inside. All the negatives aside though, the class does have a few positives. The Overcharge skill allows you to land an extra 35% damage with a fully charged Ice Lance shot. This of course allows for some incredibly heavy damage to be done from quite a long distance, given that you can hit your shot of course, and also the frost trails that you leave behind provides a guaranteed speed boost you can give to your teammates in squad games and gives a decent boost if you don't have boots yet. However, given that loot is easily attainable in the game and there are easier ways to deal damage than a highly skilled frost shot, I cannot place the Frostborn class very high in terms of viability. The speed boost at this point is not high enough to justify devoting an entire class to it, and the other skills in my view are outperformed by others in the game. That's not to say that you can't find success with the class. You can successfully run it as a squad support class with speed buffs and long range damage, and that's also not to say that the class doesn't have potential. The class definitely has a mid to high skill ceiling with utilizing the Icicle skill for movement mix-ups and flash freeze for close range combat counters, as well as finding ways to successfully land an overcharged Frost Lance. Surprisingly for how lackluster the class is, plenty of people in the poll actually prefer it in their games, and I would wager that most of these players enjoy playing squads where the class is at least half viable. However, I would not personally run this class over others in solos, nor would I prefer it over other classes in the game and squads, as its kit is just too slow to keep up. Next we'll discuss Stone Shaper, Spellbreak's tank class. Stone Shaper is all based around grounded combat and regenerating armor. There's a weird duality to this class in the sense that despite its consistent ability to regain armor and boast high damage, I've never had consistent results with the class, and that stems from the type of environments that are available in Spellbreak. Between towering mountains, deep valleys, and high-rise castles, there are just too many different ways for Stone Shaper to fail. For starters, you need relatively flat ground for your stone spell to work properly to deal damage, you need an area clear of debris and trees for your Boulder Fall sorcery to hit its targets, and you need your opponent to either not be a Tempest class or have burnt out their vertical movement options, which with the new levitate mechanic seems to be difficult to achieve nowadays. Now for a few things that Stone Shaper does well, it provides a reliable way to recharge your armor without using armor shards, it provides a decently sized AoE with Boulder Fall when the final skill is gained, and it gives players a legitimate reason to burn through their vertical movement options. This last point is the main reason why Stone Shaper sees a lot more squad play than in solos, despite the agency its armor regen provides. By using Stone Shaper to bait out an enemy's potential movement options, it leaves the rest of your squad with an opportunity to capitalize on a crippled opponent. Also in squads, with enemies being distracted by a team effort instead of focusing how to play against your specific weaknesses, it allows Stone Shaper to avoid the problems it usually would in solo play. One last point I'd like to bring up is that the Stone Gauntlet in general offers good flexibility in terms of blocking other spells. The Shockwave spell can block incoming Fireball spells, and the Boulder Fall sorcery has the ability to block largely all other Gauntlet spells. However, these applications hardly ever matter in a real fight since they're so situational, so while on paper they may sound great, reality is often disappointing. In fact, the poll we ran showed that the least amount of people prefer this class over others in the game, which for the most part reflects the disappointing reality of this class. Despite these shortcomings, it possesses the lowest skill floor in the entire game, so newer players might find a preference with this class until they're ready to move up to a more difficult class to master. With all this in mind, and with Stoneshaper boasting the lowest amount of preference among the poll results, I think it's safe to place the Stoneshaper class near the bottom of the class totem pole, despite its potential benefits. Our next class up is Conduit, Spellbreak's other designated marksman and crowd control class. However, don't let that strict designation fool you, because with the right tools, this class really opens itself up to all sorts of utility with a mid-skill floor and a high-skill ceiling. Conduit is all about using your Lightning Strike sorcery to boost other aspects of your game. Your first skill allows you to chain your lightning, which in my opinion actually helps with aiming the spell and recovering from a poor initial shot, and the regular spell only fires 3 at a time, but with our first skill in Conduit, you're actually able to hit shots more frequently, which of course helps with the damage output of the class, which is where lightning normally falls short. The Overload skill in Conduit is probably one of the most broken skills in the entire game. The ability to generate an extra rune charge by using a sorcery is an incredible advantage, especially when it's achieved so early in the game. You essentially gain the reverse of an Amulet of the Scribe on skill 2, which is nuts. In addition to this, Conduit also possesses the Power Surge skill, which cuts all mana costs from spells for 4 entire seconds, which is a huge ability. Keep in mind that this does not only apply for lightning, but for other gauntlets too, meaning after you cast a lightning sorcery, you're free to spam spells to your heart's content for 4 entire seconds. The last skill on Conduit is mostly unremarkable in secondary strikes. While the extra lightning strikes can provide some extra damage, enemies will typically escape the AoE within the time it takes for one strike to come down, so it's not that much of a boost unless the enemy is immobile anyway. The major implication for the skill would be to leave a long-lasting AoE on the origin point for any Chronomaster users, but other than that, decent players will almost always escape the extra damage. The main draw for this class comes when one finds the legendary Amulet of the Scribe, which allows you to skip the cooldown of your sorceries by activating a rune. In this way, you can chain between the runes and sorceries over and over and over again, and before the recent hotfix, this was actually a huge issue with Chronomaster and Conduit, as you could actually have an enemy constantly regenerating health while dealing chip damage with sorceries and spells. Nowadays, you can't chain this as easily, but the fact that you can instantly recharge a rune with a sorcery is one of the more broken things in this class. Sadly, the Conduit class does not see very much preference from the poll results, likely due to the stigma around Conduit and Lightning gamers from a time since past when Lightning was the undisputed king of DPS and easy damage for the longest time. But for right now, the only thing this class is missing is inherent high damage output and innate class mobility. But if you play your cards right, this class can be oppressive in both solo and squad play. The next class I want to cover is the Tempest class, Spellbreak's main mobility class. This class is coveted by many veteran players as the true homage to the old Wind Gauntlet behavior. No longer does the Wind Gauntlet normally boost your jump like it used to, but it now requires the Tempest class in order to do so. The new nature of the Wind Gauntlet makes this class the primary choice for advanced movement and Spellbreak, allowing it to have a low skill floor with a very high skill ceiling. The ins and outs of the Tempest class are all about dodging incoming damage and finding the right opportunity to land boosted counterattacks. Of course, a full frontal assault works well too, as long as you can keep the movement up. Other than the default Wind Surge skill, the Updraft skill also allows you to bounce off of your own tornadoes in a vertical direction, allowing you to mix up your movement and stay in the air, which is another crucial part of the Tempest class. The air is your friend in all sense of the word. The more ways you can find to stay in the air and deal damage while dodging incoming spells, the better your life is going to be. This is especially true when factoring in skills like Squall and Sudden Gust, which increase your spell damage and reduce sorcery cooldowns respectively. The key for mastering a class like this is knowing how to maintain your time in the air and navigating terrain while also dodging spells and sorceries effectively. In terms of effectiveness, it has quite a presence in both solo and squad play. Tempest in solos just allows players to get around difficult terrain efficiently while also building the potential for increased damage, and in squads it gets even more complex. Squad Tempest players can be both an aggressor and long-range support. Wind itself is a great counter to fire as an element, and the Wind Surge skill allows advanced movement so players can close gaps and gain high ground on their enemies. As a support role, Tempest players can also abuse the Squall Scroll with a well-aimed Frost Lance in midair, or can even just lay down tornadoes to immobilize enemies and allow the rest of the team to clean up. Overall, this class is very balanced between solo and squad viability, and may be the best general class to pick up. From the poll, it seems that quite a few veterans voted because Tempest takes up a very significant portion of preference, and if you've never played the Tempest class before, it is incredibly fun and, again, incredibly complex. It's probably the second most complex class in the game, and those that master it are incredibly hard to fight against. Following the second most complex class in the game, I think it's only fitting that we fit the most complex class next. Of course, I'm talking about Toxicologist, Spellbreak's assassin class. Now, full disclosure before I get into the class, this is my personal favorite class to play in any game mode, so my bias will probably be on full display, but I will try to stay as objective as possible when covering it here. This class possesses probably the highest skill floor in the game, and thus is not very new player friendly, as the nuances of Toxicologist play often come with experience and experimentation through real battle scenarios. That being said, in my personal opinion, this class possesses the highest and most insane potential of any class in Spellbreak in the current meta, and I do not think anyone has truly unlocked its full potential just yet. It's important in this class to know when to proc your Vanishing Mist dash, when it's best to run or engage, and whether to use your Toxic Clouds for movement or just pure AoE damage. Speaking of which, let's get into the skills. Viscosity is easily one of the most underrated skills in the entire game. The ability to effectively deny areas of the ground by threat of chip damage and decreased movement speed is crucial to mastering the Toxicologist class. This is especially effective in close range combat since you actually have two sources of damage output, both from the Toxic Gauntlet and the puddle it leaves behind. In addition to this, the puddles can be set ablaze to cause even more damage from Dragonfire when played correctly, so that's another thing to consider. Where the skill gap really starts to rear its head is in the Vanishing Mist skill. Without this skill, you're essentially a naked Toxicologist. Vanishing Mist is the bread and butter skill of Toxicologist, and without mastery of this ability, you will not find success with this class. The key to using this skill effectively is knowing when it's time to keep fighting and knowing when it's time to escape. Of course, you want to quickly fire the Toxic Cloud at your feet to proc the dash and invisibility it provides, but at the same time you don't want to do this if a fireball is headed your way, which will deal heavy damage to you. Another important point is to vary your movement. Spellbreak does a decent job of hiding your movement when you're invisible, so using that fact, you can often escape into little nooks and crannies to get a quick heal off, or you can attack from an unexpected angle. Of course, when you decide to get on the offensive, the Outbreak skill is one of the best in the entire game. This makes counterplay with the Toxicologist class a lot easier, as you can often burst down your opponents with a well-placed sneak attack from invisibility, and it makes coming back from behind in a fight that much more possible. And do I need to even mention what happens if you start a fight off with an Outbreak-empowered sneak attack? Lastly, the Spreading Sickness skill isn't the most useful one in this class, but it provides some interesting applications, like having multiple points from which to utilize your Vanishing Mist skill, and also deny certain areas of the map during a fight with even bigger AoE. It doesn't surprise me too much that not many players prefer the Toxicologist class over others from our poll, as it is difficult to master, but when it is mastered, it is a force to be reckoned with. As far as game modes are concerned, Toxicologist is more catered to a solo play style, but can still be effective in squad play for masters of the craft. Definitely not for newer players to learn right away, but an excellent class to pick up once you're more comfortable with the game in general. Last but not least, we'll cover Pyromancer, Spellbreak's Bruiser class. This class is one of the most oppressive classes in the entire game and provides a wide range of abilities to smite enemies. Possessing one of the lowest skill floors in the game for a class, it's no wonder that so many players find this class easy to pick up and use. From properly using the Pyromancer class, you're effectively able to always keep damage on your opponent. The first skill I want to look at is, of course, Combust. This skill is so effective at keeping damage on your opponent that it actually increases your margin for error when firing your Fire Gauntlet. This skill increases the blast radius of your fireballs by so much that it's hard not to hit your enemy with at least some damage. In addition to this, Conflagration, which is Pyromancer's fourth skill, also allows for extra damage to be dealt to your enemies if they happen to be so unlucky to be hit by the extra fireballs. This often results in extra damage being dealt, sometimes all at once, which is pretty nuts in my opinion. The other skills are there to boost the effectiveness of your Firewall sorcery. Pyrolysis is an easy damage buff, but Firefly is kind of a peculiar skill, allowing the Pyromancer to fly for a short time. The Firefly skill is actually pretty useful for both fleeing and chasing down opponents, and when coupled with an Amulet of the Scribe, it actually gets kind of insane both in and out of combat. There's a bit of a meme within the Spellbreak community about just holding down your W key and dealing damage, and this class in particular is the perfect personification of that. It is also for this reason that newer players should look to play with Pyromancer because for the most part, with the exception of maybe the Firefly skill, all you have to worry about is aiming and dealing damage with your Fireball spell. There's really not much else to it. The class, like I said earlier, possesses one of the lowest skill floors in the game and also one of the lowest skill ceilings, but you really don't need the highest level of skill to do well with this class, which explains why our poll results show the highest number of people using it. I highly recommend using this class in both squads and solos, with squads performing slightly better than solos with the AoE that Pyromancer provides. Besides, it's fire, and who doesn't want to launch fireballs in a Magic game? Alright guys, that's going to do it for my breakdown of the classes for the closed beta of Spellbreak, and thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Before we completely end off the video, I'd like to give a special thanks to It's OP, Captain Tramy Plays Safe, Now You're Bad, FN Flossie, and Luna Quest for spreading the popularity of my poll further than I could, and I'll have their Twitch channels linked in the description below. They're all very great content creators, and I highly recommend watching them for Spellbreak content. As far as the video goes, keep in mind that this is not really a tutorial as much as a breakdown of different things the classes can do and what classes you should be looking to play when starting out in the closed beta. Thank you all again. Be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you like to see more content, be sure to follow the links down below for my Twitch and social media, and guys, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all out there.